How's it going, everyone? It's the Natural here. MotoGP goes to so many breathtaking, amazing and incredible circuits in the world. But there are tracks and circuits MotoGP will never ever go to. And in this video I will be diving into why MotoGP don't go to certain tracks and why certain tracks are currently not on the calendar, along with one of the most iconic tracks in the United States isn't on the MotoGP calendar at this moment in time. But we're going to start off with the biggest question that gets asked quite a lot by MotoGP fans and everyone in the motorsport community is, why doesn't MotoGP not go to street tracks? Why doesn't it in the streets of Monaco? Why don't they go to the streets of Chicago, for example, in the United States? Obviously, the biggest no-no as to why MotoGP doesn't go to street tracks is safety. At actual Grand Prix circuits, they are designed with massive, huge runoff areas, with gravel traps, air fences around the barriers, and other safety measures to keep riders safe and obviously slow bikes down when they crash. Unlike in street circuits and street tracks, for example, they don't have massive runoff areas. They don't have, huge gravel traps. So what they have is obviously walls, buildings. Everything is sort of cocooned in itself, and if you crash, you're going to single-handedly have nowhere to really go. You could single-handedly high side into probably somebody's swimming pool, for example. So I don't think anybody really wants to see that. Like I said, it's just a huge, enormous safety hazard, and that's why MotoGP will never, ever, ever ride around street circuits, any sort of street circuits, to be honest, because safety is most important in this sport and in any sport really, but especially motorcycle racing. It'd just be impossible in terms of runoff areas and barriers and everything like that. As much as it will be probably spectacular maybe to see MotoGP bikes are riding around the streets of a city, but safety is so important, and this would be just impossible to do. Another part to why MotoGP don't go to some circuits is safety issues. Let's take a few circuits that used to be on the old MotoGP / 500cc calendar back in 1949 to 1990, and that is the Isle of Man and Spa. The Isle of Man and Spa were the first ever two circuits on the original 1949 500cc calendar. The Isle of Man was the first ever race ever in the history of the sport, riding around an actual island racing. It's quite bonkers really when you actually think about it. But it was gone from the calendar in 1976 because of safety issues, because the bikes were becoming faster, and obviously safety was becoming more and more important. And these weren't road bikes they were riding around like in the early 50s. These were becoming actual proper Grand Prix level bikes. The bikes were too fast, and obviously safety was important, and this is why the Isle of Man was gone from the 500cc calendar. As for Spa, it was also on the calendar back in 1949, but it was gone in 1990 because again the bikes were becoming too fast, and corners like Eau Rouge, as much as it is absolutely spectacular, it is an absolute danger safety hazard for motorbikes. But with the Isle of Man and obviously Spa being off the calendar for safety reasons, some tracks can come back to the sport if they make modification changes to the track surface or the track's layout. And that is what we've seen with two tracks, one being Brno and the other the Red Bull Ring. We'll get onto the Red Bull Ring later. We're going to start off with Brno. Brno is one of the most iconic MotoGP tracks on the calendar. For me, it's my top 5 favorite tracks in the history of the sport. It is just an absolutely beautiful spectacle, amazing, incredible. It's Brno. It's just a gorgeous circuit. But it was gone off the calendar in 2020 because of it had absolutely terrible surface. It needed major changes to the asphalt because the bikes were becoming so unrideable and so unsafe. It was like dry actual racing was becoming like actual being on sheet ice. That's how bad the track surface was at Brno in 2020. And that's why it was off the calendar for so long, because the track was just unsafe for these modern MotoGP bikes now. But it came back after a 5-year hiatus, and I'm super happy it's back, because there's no other place in the world you don't want to see MotoGP bikes ride around an amazing circuit like Brno. As for the Red Bull Ring, they had to make an absolutely huge modification change to Sector 1, and for me has completely ruined that circuit. Because of a crash that happened in 2020 involving Johann Zarco and Frankie Morbidelli, major changes had to be done to make sure that the bikes and the riders were safe to ride around a circuit like the Red Bull Ring. So the organisers, the track organisers, had to singularly put a chicane into that massive long straight, which for me has completely ruined that track, because one of the best parts of the Red Bull Ring was that massive long straight, and now you took away part of the DNA of a circuit, and it's just put a chicane in. It just doesn't really look right. It's the definition of putting a speed bump or a roundabout on a motorway, or for you Americans, a highway. It just doesn't look right, really. And for me, I'm not a real fan of the Red Bull Ring. It's not one of my favorite circuits. It's one of those Marmite circuits. You love it or you hate it. For me, I don't like it, and to be honest, I even don't like it even anymore now they put a chicane on that circuit. But for safety, and obviously to make sure we never see an incident like that ever again, it was the right decision. Another part of why certain MotoGP circuits aren't on the MotoGP calendar is the financial and outdated facilities. Elite level sport like MotoGP will need top class facilities for everybody, as there are so many people in the paddock, from obviously all the classes in MotoGP, from MotoGP, Moto2, Moto3, Rookies Cup, Talent Cups, and you've got obviously the staff, you've got obviously the teams, you've got the riders, you've got VIPs, and obviously the fans in the paddock as well. So for example, take a track that used to be on the MotoGP calendar and is not on the calendar anymore because of outdated track facilities, and that is Laguna Seca. This circuit was gone from the sport in 2013, and MotoGP was the only class ever to race around Laguna Seca. There was no Moto2, there was no Moto3, or back then 125s and 250s. They didn't race around Laguna. It was only MotoGP, and obviously it was gone off the calendar because the facilities just weren't big enough. They weren't, they were just outdated, and obviously this is an elite level motorsport where Moto3 and Moto2 are part of MotoGP's family, and obviously if you're going to single-handedly host a MotoGP race, you need Moto3, Moto2, Rookies Cup, Talent Cups, all to be part of the MotoGP paddock. And that's why Laguna is never probably ever going to come back to the calendar, is because the facilities are so outdated that for a massive, huge sport event like MotoGP, it needs a huge, enormous paddock area that is safe, obviously, for fans, riders, teams, everyone. And there's also other circuits that disappeared from the MotoGP calendar. Some circuits weren't even built to host MotoGP, and some circuits were built but never ever hosted a MotoGP race ever. So everyone, that is why MotoGP don't go to some of these tracks and circuits. If you like this video, then hit the like button and subscribe as well. I hope you all have an amazing day out there, and then I'll see you guys in another video.